My son told the court I was unstable and fit to speak or think. Irene Marks didn't argue. She let the judge read. Her name was the only one on the deed, no co-owner, no cosign. Evan stood there in a tailored suit, trying to steal what was never his. By sundown, the court knew who built the house and who was being quietly evicted from it. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the paperwork. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The courtroom's chill had little to do with the air conditioning. Irene Marks sat in the second row, spine straight despite the ache humming at the base of her back. Her hands weathered but steady rested on a closed leather portfolio in her lap. Her name echoed once on the docket, and then again, more faintly, as if someone had already begun brushing it out. At the counsel table, her son, Evan Marks, stood in a crisp navy suit, one Irene hadn't seen before. His voice, smooth as polished granite, filled the room. My mother is 72, recently injured. She's been struggling with memory. We believe she's unable to manage her own affairs and could be at risk financially, medically. This petition is meant to protect her. From the gallery, Kimberly, his wife, gave a slow, rehearsed nod. She dabbed the corner of one eye with a tissue, a move too clean to be authentic. Irene didn't speak. She didn't move. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. At the bench, Judge Trina Holloway rested her chin on a hand, one eyebrow barely lifted. Her face was unreadable, but Irene had seen that look before back when she sat in legal aid offices reviewing affidavits and prepping young attorneys. It was the look of someone waiting for the real story to arrive. Maya leaned closer to Irene, her tone low, warm. Ready? Irene nodded once. Maya stood. Your Honor, may I respond? Judge Holloway motioned with 2 fingers. Briefly. Maya stepped forward and slid a thick, tabbed folder across the bar, landing it squarely in front of the judge. This is a complete asset and competency review prepared at the request of Miss Marks. I also direct your attention to the tab-marked title, 3B. Judge Holloway opened it. Evan stiffened. Irene watched his jaw tighten from the corner of her eye, but her own expression remained placid, almost bored. Her hands didn't tremble. They never had. Not even when she argued last-minute filings in rooms much smaller and tenser than this. The judge flipped to the page Maya indicated. A pause. Then she turned the folder so the bailiff could see. Sole owner, Irene R. Marks. Title reference number, 445120092. Deed filed, the 11th of March, 1992. No co-owner listed. Kimberly looked down. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it, lips pressed together in a tight line. Judge Holloway spoke, her voice calm and cutting. Mr. Marks, you are petitioning for guardianship over a woman who, according to this, retains full legal ownership of the very property you listed in your filing as familial joint asset. Did you miss this in discovery, or did you choose not to include it? Evan adjusted his tie. I wasn't aware the title hadn't been updated. There was discussion after my father's passing, and I assumed— You assumed incorrectly, the judge cut in. Irene allowed herself a small breath through her nose. She didn't smile. Not yet. Kimberly whispered something to Evan, who ignored her. Maya cleared her throat. We will address the full scope of misrepresentations in our formal response, but for now, we simply request acknowledgement of my client's continued autonomy, asset control, and legal competency until evidence suggests otherwise. Judge Holloway nodded slowly. Duly noted. I'll review the folder thoroughly. Miss Marks, do you wish to speak? Irene met the judge's eyes. Not yet, Your Honor. Her voice, low and deliberate, carried farther than expected. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably firm. Judge Holloway leaned back in her chair, the weight of her gaze shifting entirely to Evan. Then let the record reflect that Miss Marks declines comment for now. Counsel, I'll expect a detailed briefing by end of week. Evan gathered his papers too fast. Kimberly stood, eyes darting toward the hallway like she'd parked too close to a fire hydrant. Neither looked at Irene. She remained seated, still, watching. Maya leaned in again. Want to leave through the front? No, Irene said, her eyes never leaving the judge's bench. I want them to pass me on the way out. And they did. As Evan and Kimberly walked down the aisle, they slowed just slightly at her row. Evan didn't speak, but Irene didn't need him to. They had both seen the page. The paper slid across the counter like a casual favor. Evan smiled as he handed her the pen. It's just for convenience, Mom, in case you ever need me to speak for you during rehab. Nothing permanent. Irene's hands, still bandaged from her fall, hovered above the dotted line. The font was small. The language, familiar but only if you were trained to see what wasn't written. She paused, pretending to squint harder than she had to. I thought rehab required physical therapy, not power of attorney, she said lightly. Evan chuckled. It's just temporary. Medical stuff, mostly. You know how confusing insurance can get. She signed, but not the document. Instead, she slid her reading glasses onto her nose and said, Then you won't mind me making a copy? That night, Irene scanned the form, and within 4 hours, she was on the phone with Maya. Send it to me now, Maya said. Do not shred it. Do not confront him. By the next morning, Maya had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any assumed authority granted by the form. Because Evan hadn't submitted it to the court yet, it was technically inert, but it revealed his intent. Intent was enough. From the guest room, Nora folded a fresh set of towels and poked her head into the study. You want me to make you some tea? No, thank you, Irene said without looking up from her desk. I'm too busy rewriting my identity security. Nora tilted her head. What exactly are you doing? Revoking every previous authorization Evan might have accessed, Irene said. Medical proxies, banking access, digital accounts, everything. I'm changing passwords with more layers than a wedding cake. Nora raised an eyebrow. He's treating this like a business transaction. Irene didn't look up. Then I'll audit every inch of it. Outside, a breeze rustled the live oaks. A dog barked down the street, muffled through the windows. The house still smelled faintly of lemon oil from the morning's floor cleaning. Familiar, steady. Maya's voice came over speakerphone. Irene, I've filed a revocation of power of attorney and a statement of intent to retain full legal agency. We'll send a courtesy copy to his attorney, not that he has one filed yet. Noted, Irene said, scribbling the timestamp in her own ledger. Let's keep every move in writing. Later that afternoon, Kimberly sat in her car outside a boutique real estate office downtown, her sunglasses low on her nose as she scrolled through listings on her phone. She texted Evan, Can we start showing it or not? This will take forever if she fights back. He replied, Working on it. She'll cave. But Irene wasn't caving. She was cataloging. She moved through her files like a surgeon, precise, unsentimental. Birth certificates, marriage license, title history, insurance riders, her late husband's death certificate. All digitized, sorted, and mirrored in an encrypted drive. By Friday, her financial institution confirmed the security changes. Voice print updated. Beneficiaries scrubbed. Emergency contacts replaced. Nora watched from the hallway, arms crossed, admiration tucked behind a look of concern. You know, most people your age would have hired someone for this. Irene gave a half smile. Most people my age didn't teach half the attorneys in Charleston how to draft an affidavit. On Monday morning, a thick white envelope arrived by courier. Official. The kind that reeked of courtrooms and costly decisions. Irene opened it with the same care she'd once used to unseal tax audit results. The top page read, Petition for emergency conservatorship, filed by Evan Marks. Irene inhaled once, sharply. The kind of breath that filtered anger into something colder, quieter. She turned to Nora, holding out the letter like a menu. Well, she said, her voice dry and precise. Looks like he's escalated. The ink on Evan's emergency conservatorship petition hadn't dried before Irene was on the phone with the county recorder's office. I need a certified copy of the full deed, she said. Her voice, still raspy from the bronchial infection she'd shaken off the week prior, didn't tremble. Maya arrived 2 hours later with a legal pad, a laptop, and coffee she knew Irene would never drink. We have exactly 6 days before the emergency hearing. That's enough time to weaponize truth. They spread the documents across the oak dining table, the grain worn smooth from decades of Sunday meals and contract negotiations with her late husband. A black binder, labeled Property Primary, in Irene's own tight script, sat like a shield between them. Maya flipped through the latest deed copy. This house and the adjoining lot were deeded to you in June 1992. No joint tenancy, no family trust, no co-ownership language. She tapped the page. Sole owner, Irene Marks. Irene nodded once. He thinks because I never bragged about it, I must have forgotten it. Maya grinned, sharp and satisfied. His petition assumes he's next in line for inheritance. Then let's make sure the line ends before it reaches him, Irene said. The lawyer didn't need further explanation. Within an hour, they drafted and filed a survivorship clause amendment naming not Evan, but a local Senior Services Foundation as beneficiary in the event of Irene's passing. The clause ensured that ownership wouldn't pass automatically to any blood relative unless explicitly stated. Outside, the garden bloomed in quiet defiance of Evan's assumptions. The scent of rosemary drifted through the screen door. Nora, trimming hedges by the porch, peered in through the window. "You're moving quick," she said, stepping inside, wiping her gloves on her apron. "I don't like leaving a knife unattended on the counter," Irene replied without missing a beat. Nora smirked. "They thought you wouldn't know how to fight this." Irene looked up, her expression calm but surgical. "They forgot who trained half the lawyers in this county." Maya clicked through property history records. The adjacent lot was that always included? Bought it in 1994. Quiet title. Paid in cash from my settlement check after Joe passed. Evan doesn't even know it exists. Maya raised a brow. That lot alone could fund half a clinic. That's the point. Just then, Irene's phone buzzed. A new email. She tapped it open and handed it to Maya. From Kimberly Marks. Subject: Next steps. Should we start showing it? One of my clients is looking for something historic with modern potential. Maya looked up slowly. They're trying to flip your house before the judge even rules. Irene didn't blink. Then we give them something to flip out about. She picked up her cell again. Her fingers, though slower than in her paralegal days, moved with precision. Each number was entered from memory, not habit. Charleston Property Appraisers. This is Tanya, came the voice on the other end. I need a full appraisal, Irene said. Residential with historic overlay and undeveloped lot value. It's for donation consideration. Tanya asked, to whom? That part's still being decided, Irene replied coolly. But it won't be family. Maya smiled quietly from her chair. You sure you're up for a war? Irene slid the deed back into its folder and snapped it shut. I'm not fighting. I'm filing. Outside, Nora stood by the mailbox, watching two blue jays squabble in the branches above. The air had that southern stillness dense, like the pause between legal motions. The courtroom was silent except for the soft shuffle of papers and the distant hum of an old ceiling vent. Nora adjusted her glasses and took a deliberate step up to the witness stand. She didn't wear a suit, just her usual pressed slacks and a blouse with sleeves rolled at the elbow. Functional, unassuming. Exactly the kind of woman no one expected to dismantle a lie with surgical precision. She keeps a medication log color, coded, red for pain meds, blue for daily pills. It's taped inside her kitchen cabinet, Nora began, her voice even but clear. I check it every visit. Never seen a missed dose. Judge Holloway scribbled something. Maya sat forward, eyes locked on the judge's hand. She schedules her follow-ups herself, knows the last 4 digits of every account we've had to review together, Nora added. Evan shifted in his seat. Does she ever appear confused or disoriented? The judge asked. Nora's reply came without pause. Only when people talk around her. Never when they speak to her. A soft murmur rippled through the back row. Maya rose. Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to submit 4 supporting documents. Judge Holloway nodded. The projector screen flickered to life behind them. Maya clicked through Irene's former law firm performance, reviews 3 decades worth, ending with a 2014 evaluation that read, She's the spine of this office missing nothing, forgetting less. She retired only due to physical exhaustion, Maya said, her voice unflinching. Not mental decline. Her former firm still uses her contract templates. Evan stood abruptly. That was a long time ago. People change. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. Of course they do. But the evidence here suggests Miss Marks has remained a sharp. She zones out sometimes, Evan blurted. Silence. The judge blinked. Isn't that called rest? A few suppressed chuckles broke through the pews behind them. Irene, meanwhile, sat entirely still. Her ankles were crossed, her back upright, her hands folded on her lap with the elegance of someone who knew time could either punish or protect you depending on what you did while it passed. Kimberly leaned toward Evan, whispering urgently, "Do you recall the last time she mismanaged anything legally or financially?" The judge asked Evan. He hesitated. "She called me last winter about a plumbing leak and sounded concerned," Judge Holloway interrupted. "Confused," Evan insisted. "Or just annoyed at bad plumbing," Nora offered from the stand, smiling politely. Maya stood again. "If I may, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. "I'd like to formally submit a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition on the grounds of demonstrably unfounded concern," Maya said. "We also seek preliminary sanctions, procedural abuse, and emotional distress inflicted upon Miss Marks during these baseless proceedings." The courtroom froze for a breath. Irene didn't move. She didn't look at Evan. Her expression didn't change, but her fingers curled just slightly tighter in her lap like a single paperclip snapping into place inside a full file drawer. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Holloway exhaled through her nose and said nothing for several seconds, the kind of pause attorneys recognize as a fuse being lit under deliberation. Nora descended from the stand with quiet dignity, the kind earned from a lifetime of being overlooked until it was time to tell the truth. Maya slid a final folder forward. "We're prepared for full testimony and supplemental documentation at the court's discretion." Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses. "Very well," she said slowly. "The motion is under review." The morning sun slid across Irene's dining table, catching on the gold-rimmed edge of a worn manila folder. Maya sat across from her, eyes scanning the heading. Oakbrush Grove, Revocable Trust, Dissolution Notice. "I thought you only had the house," Maya said, voice low with cautious surprise. Irene's fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "That's what they assumed. Evan was too busy sniffing around one property to realize I tucked the better one into a drawer he never bothered to open." Outside, a mockingbird called from the pecan tree. The house was still too still, like a courtroom holding its breath. Irene opened another file. "I bought the duplex on Sycamore and West back in 2001, kept it under a trust in my maiden name. George didn't want Evan to know about it, not back then, and certainly not now." Maya leaned back, processing. "Why now?" "I'm dissolving the trust today," Irene replied, setting down her tea. "I'll draft a quitclaim. One half goes to you, the other to the Charleston Senior Legal Aid Center." Maya blinked. "Irene, don't interrupt. It's a reward, not a handout. You earned it the minute you stopped flinching in court." Maya gave a slow, incredulous shake of her head. "You sure you don't want to hold it back? Just until this storm passes?" Irene folded the documents into a clean portfolio and snapped the latch shut. "They showed me where their finish line is. I've moved mine." From the counter, Nora, who'd been rinsing dishes, dried her hands and glanced over. "You're putting it all in play." "I'm not fighting on their board," Irene said. "I'm flipping the table." The next day, a packet slid across a long, walnut conference table at Evan's attorney's office. It was Irene's full financial disclosure, precisely what the court had requested. Redacted. Clean. Final. Evan's lawyer furrowed his brow, holding the paperwork up to the light like something might materialize through the black ink. "I don't see anything about Oakbrush Grove," he said, lips tight. "You wouldn't," Maya replied. "It no longer exists. She's dissolving assets in the middle of a proceeding." "No, she's distributing them," Maya interrupted coolly. "Legally, without restriction, as allowed under the current status of ownership." The lawyer looked to Evan, whose mouth opened, but no words came out. Later that evening, Evan paced his kitchen, Kimberly at the island typing rapidly on her phone. "She's bleeding it out," he muttered. "She's giving it all away." To the lawyer, and a charity, Kimberly added, not looking up. "She's not trying to win. She's trying to vanish us." Evan slammed a drawer. "It's her legacy. I'm her only child. She knows." Upstairs, Irene sat by the window with a glass of port, watching the last of the azaleas close up for the night. Her phone vibrated once, an email confirmation from the county recorder's office. "Transfer of ownership filed. Effective. Immediately." Maya called 20 minutes later. "They received it, and Evan's attorney just emailed us a statement." "Let me guess," Irene said, swirling the port. They want clarification on the redactions? They're bluffing. There's nothing illegal to find. Good, Irene murmured. Let them dig. She looked across the street, where porch lights flicked on one by one. The neighborhood settling in, quiet, unbothered. They think this is about money, Irene said softly. But it's about intent. Maya's voice was gentle. You're not just protecting your asset, you're rewriting where they land. Number? Irene smiled. I'm correcting the map entirely. The attic was quiet, except for the soft shuffle of Irene's slippers on old wood planks. The air smelled of cedar and time dust rising in narrow shafts of light between the slats. She tugged open the lid of a storage trunk tucked beneath a faded quilt, her fingers pausing as if they already knew what they'd find. There they were. Rubber-banded stacks of envelopes, ink slightly faded, still bearing postmarks from college towns, internship cities, early career apartments, all in Evan's handwriting. She carried the bundle downstairs, like fragile evidence. In the dining room, Nora looked up from folding laundry. You find something? Irene didn't answer immediately. She laid the letters out in neat rows across the table. Dozens, maybe more. He said he's always taken care of me, she said finally, eyes steady. He forgot I kept receipts. Each envelope held a version of the same pleshort on rent. Books too expensive, just until my next paycheck. One had a coffee stain on it, another had urgent underlined 3 times. Some came with apologies, others didn't bother. She never denied him. Not once. By that evening, Maya sat at Irene's desk, sleeves rolled up, feeding letters through a high-resolution scanner. We'll log the dates, annotate each with your corresponding check stubs and deposit slips. You still think this will matter? Irene asked, voice calm but distant. It won't just matter, Maya said. It'll shift the entire tone of their narrative. They're calling you a dependent when these show he's been one for decades. Outside, a storm rolled in, thunder rumbling low and distant. Irene flipped open a manila folder filled with old checkbook ledgershire own notes scribbled in the margins. She'd written, Evan August book money $200. And beneath it, he'll be a good man one day. She blinked, just once, then tucked it into the scanner pile. By the next morning, Maya had filed an amendment to the case, supplemental statement on long-term financial dependency. It included a dozen archived letters, scanned checks, and a notarized summary of total lifetime support. When Evan arrived in court that day, his confidence looked thinner than usual. Kimberly followed him in, shoulders tense, phone in hand. The courtroom buzzed as Maya submitted the packet to Judge Holloway, who read through the pages with the same calm intensity she brought to every ruling. A raised brow here, a flicker of surprise there. She said nothing at first. Mr. Marks, she said finally, your petition rests in part on your claim of long-term caretaking. This, she held up the letters, tells a different story. Evan cleared his throat. We're not disputing she supported me in the past. I'm saying she's no longer able to. To what? Say no? The judge asked coolly. Maya didn't smile, but her eyes did. Later, outside the courtroom, Kimberly texted her husband while Irene and Maya spoke quietly near the elevator. Kimberly, text, can we salvage this or not? Even, typing, paused, then, depends what she does next. As if summoned by the question, the judge re-entered the room with a folded document. Given the contested nature of this case, she announced, I'm ordering a full cognitive and psychological evaluation of Miss Marks. Irene didn't flinch. She simply stood. Maya stepped in. Your Honor, my client agrees to the evaluation on one condition. Judge Holloway tilted her head. Which is? That the findings be entered into the public record. No private summaries, no closed reports. The courtroom went still. Even Evan turned to look. Irene raised her chin, voice clear. If they want the truth, let everyone hear it. The light in the psychologist's office was soft and deliberate, calming blue walls, a water feature humming in the corner, and a low scent of peppermint oil that reminded Irene of hotel lobbies and artificial serenity. She sat upright in the upholstered chair, hands folded, coat draped neatly across her lap. Dr. Naomi Brenner smiled over her half-moon glasses. We're going to begin with a few memory exercises, Miss Marks. Nothing invasive, just conversation and recall. I hope you're more difficult than the bar, Irene replied, her voice dry but polite. The session lasted nearly 3 hours. Irene completed spatial tests, listed presidents backward, interpreted social scenarios, and then without blinking recited a full recipe for chicken a la king from a card she hadn't seen in 30 years. At the end, Dr. Brenner asked if she felt emotionally overwhelmed by the current legal proceedings. Overwhelmed? No, Irene said, adjusting her scarf. Disappointed, yes, but I've reviewed worse depositions than this circus. Dr. Brenner didn't press further. She simply nodded, scribbled her final notes, and said, "Thank you. I'll be submitting the results to the court this evening." 2 days later, both parties were summoned to reconvene. The courtroom was quietance like a held breath. Irene entered with her cane, but she walked without hesitation. Maya walked beside her, calm and unreadable. Evan stood near the front, adjusting his cuffs every few seconds. Kimberly, for once, didn't meet anyone's gaze. Judge Holloway stepped in, file in hand. The gold seal of the psychological report flashed briefly before she laid it open on the bench. Miss Marks has completed a comprehensive cognitive and psychological evaluation by a licensed forensic psychologist approved by this court. She looked up directly at Evan. The results are clear. Miss Marks demonstrates high functioning memory, judgment, financial reasoning, and emotional regulation. She shows no signs of dementia, delusional thinking, or confusion. Maya folded her hands. No gloating, just presence. Irene remained motionless. Only the corners of her mouth curved slightly like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Judge Holloway continued. There is some mention of physical fatigue and the natural effects of aging, but nothing remotely warranting guardianship or conservatorship. Evan's ears turned red before his face did. In fact, the judge said, voice cooling like metal in water, Dr. Brenner concluded that Miss Marks displays superior executive function for her age bracket. Her only complaint was, quote, having to repeat herself for people who refused to listen. A few muffled chuckles in the gallery. Maya didn't move. Irene blinked once. Kimberly leaned in toward Evan. Say something, she whispered harshly. He didn't. Judge Holloway turned the page. So I ask again, why are we here, Mr. Marks? Because from where I sit, this proceeding is no longer about protection. It's beginning to look like possession. Evan stepped forward. Your Honor, we've recently obtained new medical information that may be relevant. Maya's eyebrows twitched. Then file it properly, Judge Holloway said without emotion. But understand this, any further delays will be scrutinized under Rule 11 sanctions. Evan swallowed hard and turned back to his table. Outside, clouds were gathering. Irene stood at the courthouse window while Maya packed their documents. They're stalling now, Maya said. They're cornered, Irene replied. And cornered men don't surrender. They scheme. Just then, Maya's phone buzzed. A new motion had been filed by Evan. Emergency request to pause proceedings based on new medical evidence. Maya looked up. You called it. The envelope was cream-colored, sealed in wax, and marked only with 2 initials in fading blue ink. HM. Irene held it delicately, like one might cradle an old photograph of someone you loved and warned. She didn't say a word as she slid it across the polished oak of the courtroom bench, past Maya's hand, directly to Judge Holloway. For the record, Maya said evenly, this document was written by Harold Marks in 2009, notarized and witnessed by attorney Jonathan Keegan. The contents pertain directly to the matter of Evan Marks' fitness to handle financial decisions on behalf of his mother. Evan shifted in his chair. That's absurd. My father's been dead for... Judge Holloway raised her palm to silence him. Her fingers gripped the envelope edge and peeled back the seal slowly. It cracked like brittle wood under pressure. Inside was a typed affidavit, dated and notarized. To whom it may concern, if, at any point following my death, my wife Irene is pressured, coerced, or manipulated by our son Evan into relinquishing control over her estate, her property, or her personal affairs, it is my professional and personal recommendation that she reject such efforts in full. My son has a long history of financial impulsivity, entitlement, and emotional detachment from family matters unless they involve personal gain. Judge Holloway read silently, her lips pressing into a line as she scanned to the final paragraph. I have instructed my attorney, Mr. Jonathan Keegan, to retain this affidavit under seal and release it only upon formal petition involving guardianship or property transition. I trust Irene to decide when such release is necessary. Harold R. Marks, the 8th of July, 2009. You could feel the silence collapse over the courtroom like heavy dust. Kimberly turned toward Evan slowly, like realizing a fire had been lit beneath them years ago. Evan stood. That was over a decade ago. He was bitter, not thinking straight. As if summoned, the side door to the courtroom opened. A tall man in a gray blazer stepped inside with the worn confidence of someone who'd sat through years of depositions. He nodded to Maya. "Mr. Keegan," she said with faint satisfaction. Judge Holloway peered over her reading glasses. "Mr. Keegan, can you confirm the authenticity of this affidavit?" "I can," he said. "It's the original. Mr. Marks wrote it himself. We reviewed it together in my office. His signature, my notary seal, and the date all align. It's never been altered or opened until today." Judge Holloway set the document on the bench before her, the affidavit like a weight anchoring truth to the room. "It will be entered into the record." Evan's voice cracked. "That was a personal vendetta, not a legal statement." "That's not how notarized affidavits work," Maya replied smoothly. Nora, sitting behind Irene, leaned in and whispered, "Your late husband's still defending you." Irene didn't nod. She didn't even flinch. She merely reached into her leather bag, removed a second folder, and handed it to Myathis, one unsealed, stamped with an updated property management contract. "Your Honor," Maya said, rising, "in light of this affidavit, we are also submitting a revised occupancy notice. My client has exercised her full legal rights as sole property owner to revoke informal residency agreements with Evan and Kimberly Marks, effective immediately." Judge Holloway looked up. "You're evicting them?" "No," Irene said, her voice calm and clear. "I'm reclaiming my home." Kimberly let out a faint gasp. Judge Holloway nodded once. "So noted." Outside the courthouse that afternoon, Irene moved slower than usual, but her steps were firm. Maya walked beside her, reading her phone. "Notice of revocation filed. Certified delivery in progress. And the locksmith? Scheduled for tomorrow morning." Irene paused at the car door. "Tell him to keep the old keyhole. I want them to try it and feel it fail." Maya gave her a rare smile. Back at the house that evening, Evan and Kimberly arrived to find an envelope taped to the door. Nora stood nearby on the porch, arms crossed, watching them read. The letter was typed, precise, and final. "Effective immediately, you are no longer permitted to reside in or access the property at 814 Bellwether Lane. Any belongings remaining inside will be secured and delivered upon request within 14 days. Legal enforcement will follow non-compliance. Signed, Irene Marks, sole owner." The envelope was pale yellow, stamped certified mail, urgent. Evan ripped it open in the kitchen, his thumb slicing the corner too fast. Kimberly watched from across the counter, arms folded, eyes unreadable. He read the first line aloud, voice sharp and uneven. "This letter serves as formal notice of termination of any implied or informal occupancy agreements." Kimberly blinked. "That's an eviction." "Number no. This is retaliation." He tossed the papers down. "She's trying to punish us because the court didn't go her way." Kimberly picked up the letter and read it herself. Her lips thinned. "You told me she wouldn't do anything." "I told you she couldn't. But Irene could. And she had. The paperwork was complete, delivered, and bulletproof. Maya had seen to that. Earlier that morning, Maya stood outside the clerk's office, envelope in hand. "Notice to vacate 30 days from receipt. Since they're not listed tenants, there's no lease to protect them." "And the rent calculation?" Irene asked, leaning on her cane beside her. "I used fair market rate, backdated 12 months, Maya replied. "They'll owe almost $18,000. Irene's eyes didn't blink. "Send a separate invoice. I want them to see what their comfort cost." Inside the house, Evan fumed. "She can't just kick us out of our own family home." "It's not yours," Kimberly muttered. "Not legally." That night, Kimberly took her frustration online. A photo of the letter strategically cropped to hide the signatures appeared in a neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Being thrown out by an unstable elder who refuses help. Please pray for us during this time." Within an hour, The post began to draw sympathy from strangers who didn't know better, until Irene responded. With one image, the court-verified competency evaluation, signed by the psychologist, time-stamped, bearing a bold conclusion. Miss Marks is mentally sound and fully capable of self-governance. No caption, no reply, just proof. Within minutes, comments turned. 1. Didn't y'all file for guardianship? Another. So, she's not unstable? Just enforcing boundaries? And finally, you living in a house for free and crying when the lock turns? Please. Kimberly deleted the post within the hour. But the message had already spread. The next morning, a locksmith's van parked in front of the house. Irene watched from the passenger seat of Maya's car as fresh brass locks were installed on the side and front doors. The windows were checked for tampering. A sign was stapled discreetly inside the front window. Private residence. Unauthorized entry will result in prosecution. She won't try to sneak back in, will she? Maya asked. She won't, Irene said flatly. She'll make Evan do it. Sure enough, a voicemail from Evan landed on Maya's office line later that afternoon. His voice was quieter now, flatter. Look, I know things got heated. I think we should talk. What will it take to stop this? Maya didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she printed the voicemail transcript and added it to the case file. Then she walked it into Irene's living room, where the older woman was reshelving her legal books alphabetically by author, not topic. Threat or negotiation? Maya asked, holding up the transcript. Irene read it, then returned to the shelf. Neither. It's bargaining from a man who doesn't realize he already lost. Outside, the wind lifted the corners of the freshly delivered invoice Evan now held in his hands. $1,500 monthly x 12 months. Itemized. Interest applied. Payable within 30 days or subject to small claims court. Kimberly stood at the mailbox, silent. Evan crumpled the invoice halfway, then stopped. I'm calling Maya. She's not going to answer, Kimberly said. She has to. But when he finally dialed the number, it wasn't Maya who answered. It was voicemail. Clear. Direct. You've reached Marks and Tran Legal Group. If this is regarding the matter of Irene Marks, please leave a message. All unsolicited calls will be documented. Evan hung up and sat on the porch steps, the same steps Irene once paid to have restained. He glanced back at the locked door like a man who'd found himself outside his own assumption. The letter came folded in thirds, delivered not by courier, but by Evan himself. He stood at the edge of the porch like a man rehearsing honesty, shifting his weight between apology and performance. A breeze carried the faint scent of pine mulch from Irene's garden beds she'd had them replanted last week. He didn't notice. I thought maybe we could start again, Evan said, holding out the envelope. Publicly. Just end all this tension. Irene didn't take the letter. She let it sit there in his outstretched hand like a flag no one asked to wave. You've withdrawn the petition? She asked, voice calm. I will, he said quickly. I mean, yes, already did. Just one of them. The other we're reviewing. From inside, Maya watched through the screen door. Her arms crossed loosely, her face unreadable. She'd seen this type of play too often, appeasement disguised as remorse. I also spoke with the press, Evan added. Told them it was a misunderstanding, that you're doing well, that I regret escalating things. Irene didn't blink. You should regret filing them in the first place. There was a long silence. Evan cleared his throat. Mom, I'm saying I'm sorry. She finally took the letter from his hand but didn't open it. Do you know what peace would have looked like? He shifted uncomfortably. A what? It would have looked like you visiting after my fall, helping me into the car, asking what I needed instead of calling your lawyer. Her voice was steady, not a quiver, not a raised pitch, just cold clarity. Evan looked at the steps. I valued you, he murmured. No, Irene said, flat and final. You valued what I'd leave behind. Behind the door, Maya stepped forward and opened it. Her eyes met Irene's. No words passed between them. We're done here, Mr. Marks, Maya said, motioning slightly with her chin. Evan hesitated. So that's it? I try to fix things and get shut out? You don't get to decide what fixing looks like anymore, Maya replied. Kimberly didn't show up with him. Irene hadn't expected her to. In fact, Kimberly hadn't appeared in person since the eviction notice. She was managing optics from a distance, always better at silence than accountability. Later that afternoon, Maya and Irene sat across from each other in the sunlit living room. The windows were open. Irene had brewed Earl Grey, the kind her late husband used to keep in bulk. It filled the air with bergamot and warmth. "He's setting up a paper trail," Maya said, flipping through her tablet. "Statements. Apologies. That withdrawn petition, it's all surface. Probably trying to lay groundwork for public sympathy in case he files again down the road." "He won't get that far," Irene said, sipping slowly. "This is cleanup, not reconciliation." Maya nodded. Judge Holloway set the final hearing. Next Thursday, no delays. Irene turned her gaze out the window. "How many times have you stood in that courtroom?" "As your intern?" Maya smiled. 18. "And now as my attorney?" "This'll be number 5. They sat in the quiet together, letting the slow churn of evening fold around them. The light shifted from gold to amber across the floors. "I'm not doing this for victory," Irene said suddenly, her voice softer now. "I'm doing this so no one else ever has to write a letter apologizing for the crime of staying alive too long." Maya looked up, her eyes warmed. "That's the kind of client I'd take on any day." A minute later, Maya glanced at the calendar pinned above Irene's desk. Final hearing, circled in red. She leaned forward, voice low, like a soldier checking gear before the last march. "You ready to end it?" The courthouse was cold, even in late spring. The kind of cold that lived in the walls, older than the insulation. Irene Marks sat straight-backed in her chair, her cane resting against the side, her scarf perfectly knotted in soft navy blue. To the untrained eye, she looked delicate. To the trained one, deliberate. Evan adjusted his tie 3 times in 30 seconds. He was wearing the same gray suit from the first hearing, now slightly wrinkled, the collar beginning to collapse under pressure. Kimberly sat beside him, unreadable, scrolling her phone like this was traffic court. Their attorney, Mr. Langley, cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, our position remains unchanged. Miss Marks has demonstrated patterns of confusion, diminished capacity, and an inability to maintain complex responsibilities related to her estate." Judge Trina Holloway did not blink. "Mr. Langley, I've reviewed the medical evaluation, cognitive assessment, bank statements, affidavits, and court transcripts. This court has not seen sufficient evidence to support your claim." Langley pressed. "We'd request an extended evaluation and temporary conservatorship during the review period." Before the judge could respond, Maya rose. "Your Honor, with respect, Miss Marks has prepared a closing statement. If permitted, she'd like to read it into the record." Judge Holloway leaned back in her chair, chin resting on steepled fingers. "Granted." Irene stood slowly. The courtroom quieted, even the clerk setting down her pen. Irene unfolded the cream-colored page and held it with steady hands. "When my son filed this petition, he described me as unstable. He said I was prone to confusion and incapable of making decisions. He mistook silence for surrender. But silence is not confusion. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes it's restraint." She paused. The paper didn't flutter. Her voice didn't crack. "I raised a son. I worked full-time. I cared for a husband through cancer. I paid mortgages, read contracts, and mentored young lawyers in this very county. If I'd wanted to sign everything away, I would have with witnesses, a date, and a notary. But I didn't. And I never will." Evan's eyes darted, searching the room for someone to agree with him. Kimberly remained motionless. "My son valued the property more than the person in it. That isn't confusion. That's clarity." She folded the paper in half and looked directly at the judge. "I ask this court not only to dismiss his petition, but to recognize what this was, a calculated, unsupported attempt to seize control for financial gain." Judge Holloway nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Marks." She turned to the opposing counsel. "All claims are denied. Guardianship is rejected. Motion for conservatorship dismissed." Langley opened his mouth. "And," she continued, "this court is filing sanctions for bad faith petitioning against Mr. Langley's office. Using court time and taxpayer resources to push unfounded personal agendas will not go unchecked in this courtroom." Langley paled. Maya didn't smile, but her fingertips gently tapped twice against the edge of the table. A signal. Precision had won. Irene eased back into her seat, her body tired. but her spine as straight as the lines in her will. Across the aisle, Evan muttered something under his breath. "Excuse me?" Judge Holloway said, looking directly at him. "Nothing, Your Honor," he said, barely audible. A clerk handed a stamped copy of the judgment to Maya, who passed it to Irene like a relay baton. The courtroom emptied slowly, reporters leaning against the walls, sniffing for quotes. Irene offered none, just the quiet gathering of her folder, her cane, and her dignity. Judge Holloway remained seated, watching as everyone prepared to exit. Then, just before Irene stepped away from the podium, the judge spoke once more. "Miss Marks," she said, voice level but unmistakably curious. "You're free to speak now. Is there anything further you'd like to say?" The hallway outside courtroom B buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Reporters leaned forward with outstretched mics, camera lights flared, and a young man with a podcast mic shouted, "Miss Marks, one statement for our audience. How does it feel to win?" Irene paused just outside the threshold, adjusted the silver pin at her collar, and gave a soft, deliberate smile. "Let the judgment speak," she said, then walked away, no elaboration, no need. Behind her, Evan pushed through the crowd, his tie loosened, sweat blooming dark under his arms. Kimberly moved faster, her eyes scanning for exits, jaw tight with resentment. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't speak to each other. The doors of the courthouse swallowed them whole. By the time Irene reached the parking lot, the sun had broken through the Charleston haze. The bricks beneath her feet radiated warmth. Maya walked beside her, briefcase in one hand, iced coffee in the other. "They're going to be quiet now," Maya said. "The press, the family. It's over." "No," Irene replied, unlocking the passenger door. "It's clean. That's better." That afternoon, she filed a motion through Maya's office, a personal protection order, quiet but ironclad. It didn't name Evan in bold or recount every manipulation. It simply stated, in precise language, that all in-person and electronic contact was prohibited under civil threat. Filed. Stamped. Done. The next morning, Irene stood at the kitchen table of her rental property, the one Evan never knew about, and slid a single brass key across the marble to Maya. "It's yours now," Irene said. "The trust transfer finalized yesterday. You'll see the paperwork in your inbox." Maya hesitated, then picked up the key slowly. "You're sure?" "I'm 72, not stupid," Irene replied. A glint in her eye. "You earned it." Nora arrived at noon. Her white scrubs traded for soft lavender slacks and a linen blouse. She brought lemon bars and an envelope. "Irene," she said, settling into the sunroom chair, "this is goodbye. I'm retiring next week, moving to Asheville. My granddaughter's due in the fall." "You've done more than enough," Irene said, pouring orange juice into tall glasses. "This brunch is for you." The women, Maya, Nora, and Irene, ate in the sunroom surrounded by peace lilies and jazz on low. They toasted with sparkling cider, and when Nora stepped out, Maya read aloud from the morning paper. "Senior wins back rights. Estate without raising her voice," Maya recited. "Nice pull quote." Irene didn't respond immediately. She was looking out at the backyard, where a squirrel darted up the cedar tree and vanished into its branches. "Words should do their job," Irene said finally. "Not waste anyone's time." That evening, alone in her reading chair, she opened her mail. Mostly catalogs and donation appeals, but one card stood out thick cream stock, handwritten in navy ink. "Miss Marks, I observed your case this month from the back bench during my internship. You inspired me to apply for elder advocacy. We're taught to listen to power, but you made it quiet. Thank you. Ellie Prescott, Charleston Law School." Irene read it twice. Then she placed the card in a folder labeled Encouragements, tucked it between a hospital discharge report and a recipe for blueberry clafoutis. She stood, smoothed her blouse, and switched off the porch light. Irene pressed the publish button with a steady finger. The ebook was titled Power of Paper, What They Won't Tell You. Just under 90 pages. It wasn't long, but it was pointed, precise, and deeply practical. Every chapter was based on what no elder wants to admit, and every manipulative relative hopes they never learn. How to read a title, revoke a POA, freeze access, demand a competency exam on your own terms. and document everything before anyone else can spin it. The download counter ticked once, then again. By noon, it had cleared 400. "That's all?" Irene asked Maya as they sat side by side on the Charleston Library lawn, pamphlets stacked neatly in a box beside them. Maya smirked. "Give it time. We're just getting started." The first legal clinic opened 2 weeks later, free, volunteer-run, and funded in full by a trust Irene set up with money she once thought would go to her son. They called it the Foundation for Standing Paper, Irene's idea. Every Saturday, retirees from across the region came, some quiet, some crying, some red with shame. They brought boxes of envelopes, bank statements with strange withdrawals, deeds that had mysteriously disappeared, and court notices they didn't understand. Irene sat at the check-in table. She didn't say much, but when they looked at her, the woman whose story had circled through the Charleston Post and public legal archives, their shoulders eased. "I saw your quote," one man told her. "The part where you said you didn't raise your voice, just your guard, that hit." "I meant it," she replied. "And you still have time to mean it, too." The fallout came like loose shingles after a storm. Kimberly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable financial damage and reputational harm. The papers were dry and unsigned by Evan. His last Charleston address bounced back. Rumors swirled Atlanta, maybe somewhere in Texas. Bankruptcy court records were vague but public. His name had been scrubbed from local bar association listings. Irene never mentioned him again. Instead, she sat at her dining table one late October morning, wrapped in a gray shawl, and reviewed the final draft of her will. Maya sat across from her, tapping her pen. "No family listed?" she asked gently. "Correct. Not even cousins?" "Especially not cousins." Maya didn't press. The document was airtight. The trust went to the clinic, the house to a transitional program for elderly women recovering from financial abuse, the second property to Maya outright, with an optional clause for reallocation if she ever wanted to use it as a safe house. As Irene signed the final page in smooth, deliberate penmanship, Maya reached into her bag. "I was going to wait," she said, pulling out a wrapped square. Irene raised an eyebrow. "It's not pie," Maya added, smiling. Irene unwrapped the gift slowly. Beneath the paper was a mahogany photo frame. Inside, a black and white picture of Irene seated at the courthouse steps, head tilted slightly, gaze unflinching. Below it, engraved in brushed gold, "Unfit to speak, but too wise to argue." Irene stared at it a long time before speaking. "Where did you get the photo?" "Someone snapped it the day of the verdict," Maya said. "Sent it in anonymously. Guess it stuck." The clock in the hallway chimed 4 times. Outside, wind moved through the porch wind chimes, the same ones Irene had hung after her very first paycheck in the legal secretary pool. They had a clean, hollow sound, like something being marked down as final. She set the frame on the mantel and nodded once. "It's good," she said. The brush slid across the hallway wall with the quiet patience of someone reclaiming space inch by inch. Irene dipped it back into the pale cream paint, wiped the edge, and resumed her steady, careful strokes. The baseboards would be next, then the trim, then the shutters out front, which she'd already chosen a soft Carolina blue for a nod to the shade her husband once said reminded him of Charleston skies in April. She didn't hire it out, not because she couldn't, because she wanted to. Each pass over the walls was like rewriting memory in her own hand. The smudged print from Evan's suitcase dragging against it last year? Gone. The hairline crack Kimberly had scotch-taped instead of telling her about? Gone. The part of her that used to feel like a guest in her own hallway? Vanished. In the garden, tomatoes had returned green, clustered, waiting. The herbs thrived again without being pulled too early or trampled by careless feet. The lavender had spread slightly past its border. Irene let it. Every time she stepped outside, the air wrapped around her like chamomile and cut grass. No hurried footsteps, no slammed doors, just the bees, the rustle of leaves, and the faint hum of wind through the trellis. "Sanctuary," she whispered one afternoon, sipping from a ceramic mug Nora had given her before retiring. That's what it always was. Now it simply looked like it again. Thursday afternoons were for the book club 3 regulars, including Ruby, a retired librarian who drank her iced tea with a sprig of rosemary and always brought a magnifying glass. They read slowly, No one skipped pages. Nora still joined sometimes, though she claimed retirement was keeping her busy. More than once, she'd walked through the back gate with a pie under one arm and a new reading lamp under the other. Maya came by often, never empty-handed, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes with stories from her latest client, sometimes with nothing but a tin of cookies and her usual greeting, "You look busier than my inbox." Irene would always raise an eyebrow. "You look like someone avoiding email." They'd laugh and fall into their familiar rhythm, the easy warmth of two women who'd moved beyond obligation and into something familial. Maya had started calling her my second mother, but only in private. No one spoke of the trial anymore. Not Maya, not Nora, not Irene. But something had shifted in Irene, a quiet decisiveness that didn't need acknowledgement. She'd cut her hair short again, just like she had in '92 when she first bought the house in her own name. She wore silver now, not gold, and she stopped apologizing when she didn't want to answer the phone. On a Sunday morning, after pruning the rose bush that had always bloomed stubbornly out of season, Irene sat on her porch with a fountain pen and a crisp, lined sheet of paper. Sophie, the 8-year-old girl next door, had brought her mint tea in a mason jar that week, no sugar, just steeped leaves and patience. The girl had said nothing, just smiled and handed it over like she understood something grown-ups often missed. Irene began the letter. "Dear Sophie, there will come a day when someone says you can't. They'll say it kindly, or maybe with a sharp edge. It won't matter. I want you to remember one thing: not everything worth doing needs to be defended aloud. Sometimes the best answer is no answer at all. Just stay standing. Just keep the paper." With warmth, Miss Irene. She folded it neatly, sealed it in an envelope, and with a felt-tip pen wrote the title across the top, "When They Say You Can't Say Less." The sun slanted across Irene's desk, catching in the beveled edge of a glass paperweight shaped like a gavel. She'd bought it for herself decades ago, back when she was still sorting motions and affidavits in a firm run by men who always assumed she was the secretary. They'd stopped making that mistake when she started training the new associates better than the partners did. Now, the only thing sitting in front of her was the folder, thick, crisp, complete. The fire safe was open beside her chair, its heavy lid waiting like a silent witness. She glanced once more at each tab, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately, as if every page deserved a moment of stillness. Will updated, notarized, witnessed. No family beneficiaries listed. Maya's name appeared twice, once as the executor, once as a recipient trustee for the nonprofit fund Irene had created to help seniors facing legal pressure from their own families. A line at the bottom read, "Because you defended me when I couldn't speak without being twisted." Affidavit sealed, signed by Irene's late husband, dated 2009. His words echoed still. "If Evan ever attempts to take control of your estate, presume the motive is financial. Court dismissal certified. Case closed. Guardianship denied. Sanctions issued against Evan's legal counsel. Public record. Property records adjusted. Title transfer to her name alone. Secondary property reassigned to the Elder Rights Trust. Survivorship clause locked in. Charitable donation plan documented." Final addendum, just one sentence. No further contests allowed. Irene laid the final sheet flat and pressed her palm gently across the pages, not to smooth them, but to feel their presence. Paper had always been her armor. Not words, not speeches, just ink, clauses, structure, and proof. Outside, a gentle breeze pushed the wind chime beneath the eaves into motion. Its sound was high, sweet, like glass kissing glass, the same chime she'd bought with her very first paycheck, back when her last name was still Bertram, and she thought Charleston summers were too hot for living. It had followed her to every place she lived since, but this was the only one that had ever felt entirely hers. The house was quiet now, and not because it was empty, but because no one was walking on eggshells. No one was listening through doors. No one was waiting for her to forget something so they could use it as leverage. She reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a small white envelope. Inside, Sophie's letter, the one she had written and sealed last week. It sat beside the folder, a private postscript to a public victory. Footsteps approached outside. Not hurried, not hesitant, just familiar. Maya knocked gently, then let herself in, holding a paper cup of coffee and a small yellow envelope. "Good timing," Irene said without turning. I was just sealing the last of it. Maya set the coffee down and glanced at the fire safe. Is that it? The whole war? Not a war, Irene said softly. Just proof of what was always mine. She slid the folder in, closed the lid, and turned the key. Maya pulled the yellow envelope from her pocket and handed it over. This came to the office. No return address, just read it when you're ready. Irene opened it while Maya waited. Inside was a photo, a grainy screenshot of the courtroom, taken from behind Irene sitting calmly while Evan stood mid-sentence, gesturing, red-faced. On the back of the photo, a sentence written in neat, slanted handwriting. You reminded me we don't always need volume to make our point. AJ, public defender intern? Irene smiled, folded the photo, and placed it into the safe too. She sat back, her hands resting loosely in her lap, and listened to the wind chime as it played its quiet song. Her breath was steady, her eyes clear. Her voice, though unused at the moment, had already spoken where it mattered most.